We're going to be starting our relationship series today and ending it next week. If we get the slides up, yes. We're having a relationship series, and we're going to be starting by talking about your relationship with God. And today's passage, it's a quick one, is out of 1 John chapter 4, verse 19. It says this: "We love because he first loved us." Can we read that together? We love because he first loved us. If you guys don't know who I am, I'm Dave. I'm one of the pastors here. I have the privilege and honor of pastoring this church, and we're so glad that you guys are here to join us. And to start things off, we're going to be talking about how to have a relationship with God. How to have a relationship with God. And in this room, there's probably people in three categories. There's someone here who has a relationship with God. There's people in here who don't have a relationship with God, and there might be people in here who are not sure if they have a relationship with God. So today, what's going to guide our talk is these three questions. And these are three guiding questions to ask yourself when it comes to your relationship with God, how you can deepen your relationship with Him. And I think if we can answer these three questions, or just have a practice of working through these three questions, our relationship with God would deepen. If you don't have one, it'll be created. And if you're not sure, it'll be solidified. So these three questions are: does he exist? Does he care? And what did he do? Does he exist? Does he care? And what did he do? How many of you guys are sick of hearing about how Christianity is not a religion, but a relationship? Show of hands. Yes, Musola. I can always trust him. I'm sick of it too, right? And it's true, but it may not always be helpful. And even when I scan the landscape of social media, i.e. YouTube, and look up messages on how to have a relationship with God, much of it kind of works off of this one basic assumption. It assumes that you already have a relationship with Him. And so what happens? Lots of these messages, and tons of them, not saying that they're all bad, but because of that one baseline assumption, it creates messages and talks and teaching on lots of advice on how to turn a cold relationship and turn it into something hot. But you can't turn something warm if it's not there at all. And so for today's talk, I don't want to make that basic assumption. We can't even get to talking about how to warm up your relationship with Him if you don't even have one. So I'm not going to assume that everyone here believes that He even exists. Which leads me to the first question. Does He exist? Does He exist? When was the last time you wrestled with the idea of God's existence? And I know some of you, especially if you're in that first group, and just because it's the first, it doesn't mean it's the best. But that first group of people here who believe, genuinely believe, I have a relationship with Him. If you are here and you feel like I follow Jesus, and you may be saying to yourself, nope, I never question His existence. I will never doubt Him. I'm good. I will never doubt. I'm not a skeptic. I believe in Him. And God bless you. Love that. I love that heart. Amen to that. But let me caution you. Let me approach this with some fear and trembling. There have been much smarter and more dedicated, more committed, more influential Christians who've walked away, not just from the church, but actually from their faith. In this past COVID season, there have been prominent church leaders, church worship leaders, songs that you may have grown up singing to. Those guys wrote them. They went on to go and publicly renounce their faith in Jesus, not just their attendance of church. And so even if you don't get to that point of, I'm probably not going to renounce my faith, I'm sure at some point in your life, you've asked God, are you even there? You've been left in some sort of situation or predicament where you had to ask yourself and had to ask God, are you there? So if you don't struggle with the philosophical, ideological existence of God, there's a personal struggle that we have when it comes to God's existence. That when we go through stuff, oftentimes it's easy and quick to ask God, are you even there? Do you hear me? Do you see me? So the question of God's existence, His presence, His there-ness is relevant to even the most seasoned of Christians. That there's like Paul said, this duty for us to work out our salvation in fear and trembling. If you're in the second group are the people who are not sure whether they have a relationship with God. I have a couple guiding questions. Just to let you guys know, every point in this sermon has 3 points attached to it, all right? I'm not saying it's going to be long, but that's just how we're going to be working through things today, all right? 3 times 3 equals 9. Math. Questions to ask yourself if you're not sure if you have a relationship with God. 1, is God first? How is God becoming first in every area of your life? Your money, your time, your relationships. How do they reflect that God is the priority in your life? In your family, where is God first in your life? How do your kids see and know that God is first in your life? Second, what has he said to you? What has he said to you? Not what have you said to him, but what has he said to you? When was the last time he spoke to you? And if you're like, God never spoke to me, I ain't like that, I don't got that kind of gift, well then, there's this thing called the Bible. And what we are called to do is open that book, and maybe you might just get some basic instructions on life before leaving Earth, right? That's the Bible. We kind of all learned that stuff in Sunday school. And when he's silent, we open the book, and that is still his manifest word of God. What has he said to you? How do you incorporate listening into your practice, into your relationship with him? Just a quick disclaimer. Some of you guys have this DGI mentality, this I don't got it, right? I don't got it mentality. I don't got that gift. I don't got that. I just made that up right now, all right? Creativity, y'all, spontaneity, DGI mentality. I don't got it. Don't got it, right? I don't got it mentality. And I talk to so many people who profess to be followers of Jesus, and they have that DGI mentality. I don't got it. I don't got that gift. But let me tell you, it's oftentimes, when it comes to his voice, his word, it's not just so much the volume of his voice, but it's actually mainly the posture of his heart. Do you have a posture in your heart that refuses to be denied, that refuses to not be unheard? It's more of a posture of the heart. It's an issue of the heart as opposed to the volume of his voice. And lastly, who have you blessed? Who have you blessed? You see, God's love is tied to our love for people. And loving people is not just a command, but it's a reflection of your love for God. It's not one as a higher command than the other. No, they're actually together. They're tied together, interwoven together, that our love for people will manifest. Our love for God will manifest in our love for people. And so who have you blessed? Just a quick disclaimer. If you are even asking the question, do I have a relationship with God? That's a good start. That's a good start. Let me encourage you, all right? Let me encourage you. If you're even asking that question, if you're struggling with that, if you're wondering, do I love God enough? That is a good struggle. It's a good sign. Lastly, there are people in the last group who are adamantly opposed to the idea of God. And if anything, I respect you. If you're in that group, I respect that heart. But let me tell you something. Andrew Huberman, he is a professor of ophthalmology in Stanford University. He's a scientist and researcher. He's kind of becoming a rock star in the science community. And this is what he said. He's a scientist saying this. He said, I never thought I'd talk like this, but I started a practice of prayer in the last year. There were certain aspects of myself that I could not resolve on my own. No matter how much therapy, no matter how much, quote, plant medicine or medicine, exercise, friendship, I could not resolve it. I'm acknowledging that there's something bigger than me, bigger than nature, something I cannot control. It's becoming clear to me that if we do not believe in something bigger than ourselves, we will self-destruct. The second quote here is, if I find in myself desires which nothing in this world can satisfy, the only logical explanation is that it was made for another world. People have been and always will be looking for answers. And through a large part of human history, believing in some sort of transcendent divine being was always assumed. It was always thought to be, it wasn't even a question. The atheism that we know today is actually a very modern invention. It's only been around in the past 500 years. It's kind of a new thing, historically speaking. So back then, if you didn't believe in the God of the Bible, then it was another God or many gods that you believed in, that you found your hope in, that you found answers to. And so it wasn't until after this Enlightenment period where the questioning of a divine being began. For centuries and millennia, people were going to gods. People were always going to gods. And so we have to ask ourselves, why did people go to gods to begin with? Simply put, they were all looking for answers. They were all looking for a solution. If there was no rain for their crops, what did they have to do? They prayed to the God of rain for rain. If they couldn't have babies, what did they do? They prayed to the God of fertility so that they could have babies, that they could fill in the workforce in the armies. If they needed to go into battle and win this war and find victory, what did they do? They prayed to the God of war, the God of victory, to grant them victory. Humanity, you and I, for our entire history, have been trying to find solutions to problems. Some of you guys are living this life where you feel like you're constantly trying to resolve problems. Let me tell you, that's humanity. And we'll all get to that point sometime in our life, like Andrew Huberman got to, where he realized that there was just no answer. There was no answer in himself. There was no answer in plant medicine. There was no answer in this world. He just was left without an answer. Or, on the flip side, maybe you went to God. Maybe you tried this whole thing and you didn't get an answer. All you heard was silence. And so what did you do? You stopped believing. There was this controversial MMA fighter. He went on a podcast interview, and he shared about the exact moment in his life where he got there, where he got to where I was talking about. It was when he was a little child, probably like yay high, and his mother was being beaten up by his father. And so what did she do? What did he do? He just clung on to his mom's leg. And in tears, this hard MMA fighter, this guy who beats up people for a living, in tears, he literally said, "That was the moment I stopped believing in God." When he would pray for his mother's protection, and it wouldn't happen, the beatings wouldn't stop. When he couldn't get an answer, he stopped believing in God. And to that, when I hear that, I empathize. I have so much compassion for that. When he said that, I started weeping myself because I could feel the pain that he went through. Just as a little child watching his mother being beaten and God not responding and not answering. But let me kindly and humbly submit to you and ask you not to be so quick to point your finger at God. Not because I don't want you to not judge him, not because I'm protective of God, but because I want to more so look at and take stock of how you're processing your pain. That though oftentimes when we process pain, there's going to be a point in the journey of us processing pain where we just go out and shoot blame. And just blame. And any therapist, any person who knows any sort of mental health can tell you that if you are in a position of just constant blame, that is never a way to properly resolve your pain and your suffering. And yet, for some reason, we always do that to God. When something good happens to us, what do? We thank the universe. But when something bad happens, what do? We blame God. I'm not trying to be insensitive. I'm trying to take stock of how we process these painful, suffering moments in our lives. That we get so quick, like the world does, to give credit to the universe when good things happen, but blame God when bad things happen. We have to look at how we process our pain, and we have to be We are so quick to jump to blaming God or other people, and that never resolves the problem. It never resolves our pain. It never actually deals with the suffering that we've gone to. We look to God and we look to other gods for answers. I knew of a student, his friend literally worshiped the devil. He wasn't a Satanist in that group. He was literally a devil worshiper, that he had this private relationship with demons. And my friend, who was a Christian, asked him, why do you worship the devil? Like, why do you talk to him like that all the time? And he said, you know what he said? It's because he gives me everything that I want. He gives me everything that I want. You don't need to believe in the God of the Bible to get what you want, essentially. You see, we look to God, and humanity has looked to gods for an answer. But what if the God of the Bible is the only one who actually gives a legitimate answer and resolution to the things that we've experienced? That oftentimes we're going to God to eliminate suffering and pain. But what Jesus does is that he actually gives it meaning. He infuses our struggle with purpose and eternity. And that's what Jesus does. So the questions of his existence, of his presence, is he real, are inextricably tied with our need for answers. You have a need for answers. There's a God of the universe, the one true and living God of the Bible, who can actually answer them. And so we have to ask ourselves, when you are lost, when you are stuck, when you are down, who do you go to for answers? Who do you go to find your resolution, to find your redemption? We think we are looking to God for proof when we are actually looking to the answers to our life's problems. Who do you run to when things aren't necessarily going your way? When you're faced with a problem or pain or suffering, who do you run to? I will argue that the next question in our time, our next question is the real question that we're struggling with, not necessarily the question of his existence, but more so the question of his care. The question of his care. 1 Peter 5:7. Cast all your anxiety on him because he cares for you. And I get it. Reading a passage like that right now, after asking the question of does he care, is like a husband telling his wife that he cares right after she asks, do you care? Let me read that part again. Reading this passage of cast all your anxiety on him because he cares for you right now is like asking, is like right after asking the question of does he care, is like, where am I? Is like a husband, gentlemen, husbands, is like a husband having to tell his wife that he cares right after she asks with an exclamation point, do you care? No question mark. And let me, gentlemen, especially young gentlemen in this room, if they need to ask, then that's already the problem to begin with. If they need to ask, right? I see a lot of the wives like turning their heads slowly at their husbands. So I get it. Reading this passage in 1 Peter is kind of like that. It doesn't answer the question. It doesn't really help. It doesn't help your heart. But I think this question may get deeper to your heart and your experience and your pain. And what we think about the questions, when we ask the questions about his existence, most likely we're asking the questions about his care, wondering if he cares about me, if he sees me, if he knows me. And so these are three things that we need to look at if you want to assess and understand if someone cares. How do you know when someone cares? Three things. There's this thing called immanence. Immanence. There's this quote from John Frame. He says this: to say that God is immanent is to say that he is present in time and space, that he is near us. There's no biblical term that captures all of what theologians want to say about God's transcendence, but the idea of immanence is helpfully summarized in the term Emmanuel, God with us. The way you know someone cares is that they will come to you. they won't make you come to them. They'll meet you right where you're at. John 14:18, Jesus says, I will not leave you as orphans, but what? I will come to you. He doesn't say, I'll bring you on my level. No, he says, I will come meet you where you're at. There's so many accounts of Jesus coming to his disciples. He came to his disciples after his death. He came to the adulterous woman and asked, who condemns you? He came to earth to take on the form of a man, not as a demigod, not as Thor, not as some Marvel hero or superhuman being, but he came as nothing. He came to us, and he didn't make us come up to him. So much of the world's advice right now, it's all about you coming up to a certain level. It's all about you going to the next level and you coming up some place. But actually, what does Jesus do? He came down. He came down in the form of man to make himself nothing. He came to us. The way you know someone cares is that they will come to you. They'll meet you at your level, not make you come to them. The second thing is empathy. He knows. Hebrews 4:15. For we do not have a high priest who is unable to sympathize with our weaknesses, but we have one who's been tempted in every way, just as we are, yet he did not sin. Jesus' empathy was more than just understanding. It was experience. It was experience. Jesus was a suffering servant, and he felt and experienced the whole array of human experience. He felt physical pain on the cross, and even before he went to the cross, he would shed blood through his pores because of the stress that would happen. He had experienced the loss of a loved one, over and over again. He experienced the betrayal of some of his closest friends. He experienced financial and provisional needs. For example, feeding the 5,000. Have you ever in your life fed 5,000 mouths in one sitting? That's a huge financial provisional task. It's hard for us even to put Maundy Thursday dinner together, let alone feed 5,000. Also, Jesus was visually challenging. Isaiah 53. He was ugly. He has no beauty or majesty to attract us to him. Nothing in his appearance that we should desire him. Everyone in this room is beautiful. You guys all are. Yeah. Christian, thank you. But sometimes we look in the mirror and there may be some of us that may be like genuinely like, man, I look great today. But some of us may feel like we are a little bit visually challenging. Not visually challenged. Visually challenging. You know? And I don't make light of that. But he was also ugly too. Like, if any of my children were to write a memoir about me and write, what's so funny? If any of of all the things that my children could write about me, if they dare to write in the book that will last a lifetime for billions of people to see, and they write, there was no attractive quality about him. Physically grotesque, my goodness. I would be a little hurt, to be honest. I'd be like, of all the things you could have written, did you have to call that out? Right? My middle child, she's kind of savage. Is that the word? She used to call me fat. And then you know what she ended up saying? Because I told her, you know what? It doesn't really hurt my feelings, but you shouldn't say that, because I just didn't want her to say that to other people. She'd be like, okay. And she took a stick, just poked my stomach, and was like, Daddy, you look like you've eaten a lot. Like, a lot. And I'm like, you know what? That's genius. I'll take that. Still hurts. Kind of hurts worse, but still hurts. If any of my children were to write about me, there was nothing attractive about him. I would tell my kids, why did you have to say that? I'm not saying you're wrong, but why did you have to say that? So Jesus suffered. He experienced it. He knew. And he suffered, not so that we could stop suffering, but he suffered so that we would know that he knows what pain means to us, what suffering means to us. That we would know that he knows, not just understands, but has experienced it. like for example, like when you've gone through stuff and gone through pain, and then when you hear about someone else's story, and the thing that they've gone through is like 100, 1,000 times worse, you kind of look at your story and you're like, man, you know what? I don't think I should complain. I remember I was telling, I was at this church pastors network. This was a couple years ago, and this gathering, and it's kind of like, pouring out my heart. Really, it was just kind of confessing, or just, really just complaining about all that I went through, the betrayal that I experienced, and all the pain that I had to go through to get to where I was at. There was this sweet, sweet pastor from upstate New York. His name was Jason. Right after me, he shared his story. And he was a former Jehovah's Witness preacher. He wasn't just a follower, but he was actually one of those main stage keynote speakers at these Jehovah's Witness conferences. And all of a sudden, as he was preaching, and as he was reading his Bible, he just could not deny that the power and the authority of Jesus. He could not deny that Jesus was the one true and living God. And so all of his messages just kept on preaching Jesus. It got to the point where his life was threatened, and then he had to actually leave the Jehovah's Witness group. And when he left with literally nothing. And then when he took up a church pastoring position, he got paid today a couple $100 a month to survive in New York, in America, which is literally impossible. And I'm like, how do you do it? And with a smile on his face, he said, well, we just live in a trailer right by the water. And it's great because we fish for food. And if we don't have food, God just provides. And I'm like, what do you mean God provides? He said, yeah, last week someone dropped off half of a cow. Not like in steak form. He said in literal, I didn't know that happened in upstate New York. But he said, yeah, literally one of our church members dropped off half a cow. And so now I'm on the carnivore diet. That's it. And I was looking at him, hearing all of his stories of betrayal, how people had threatened his life, how he lost everything, how he's living on a couple $100 a month in his trailer with his kids, serving Jesus, pastoring a tiny little church in upstate New York. And I thought to myself, you know what? I don't think I should complain anymore. I literally, after meeting him, made the decision to stop complaining after hearing his story. What Jesus went through wasn't just him suffering at our level. It was him suffering at a cosmic level, a divine level, a level that we would never understand. To the point where if you saw the embodiment of Jesus' suffering on the cross, all of our suffering, all of our pain would just be minuscule compared to what he went through. When you see people going through stuff and you see them do it joyfully, and you see them do it for Jesus, and you see them with a smile on their face, I had to ask Jason, I asked him, so what keeps you going? Why do you keep on doing this, man? Making a couple $100 a month. It almost seems a little irresponsible that you're still pastoring at this church, and he's told me, and he's like, Dave, it's not that I haven't received other offers. I've received offers to the point where my kids would be taken care of for the rest of their lives too. And I'm like, that seems like a no-brainer. Like, what are you still doing there in your trailer, living off of a couple $100 a month, serving Jesus at this tiny little church? And with tears in his face, he said, because I know that that's what makes my God happy. He said, that's my conviction. God told me to go to this church, so that's why I'm there. I looked at all the things that I went through, all my pain and suffering to start this church, and I'm like, you know what? I'm never going to complain. I'm never going to complain. That's what happened with Jesus on the cross. He suffered, not so that our suffering would stop, but he suffered so that we know that he knows what pain means to us, what pain means to him. And he suffered it on a cosmic level. Jesus just doesn't understand, but he's experienced. Lastly, do something. When you know someone cares when they're willing to do something about it. Jesus, he carried his cross. He died on his cross and conquered death with the instrument of death so that we would no longer live in the sting of it. He conquered death with an instrument of death. That's the ultimate cosmic judo move. That he literally used death to conquer death. He did something about it. He came down in the form of a man and walked and carried his cross. Have you experienced the care of God? When was the last time when you were going through something, you experienced God's care? I'm not talking about you just justifying yourself out of the thing that you're experiencing, which happens a lot. We tell ourselves, oh, I shouldn't be complaining because I know people are going through worse. And I know I gave a whole story about someone who literally went through worse things in my life, and I stopped complaining about it. But sometimes we justify our way out of our pain and our suffering. And Jesus, he doesn't do that. He doesn't say, hey, look at what I went through. Stop complaining. What did he do? He picked up that cross and he walked it down. And he took 2 nails into his hands and his feet. And he suffered. Have you experienced the care of God? Have you sat long enough in what you're going through for God to care for you? For God to love on you in it? We're so quick to jump out of that valley, of that dark moment, and jump into positive thinking, to jump into positive manifestation, to jump into something that would make us feel good or make us stop complaining. And we're so quick to jump into the next thing that we never stay in the thing that we're actually going through. We never sit in it and allow Jesus to care for us. Oftentimes when I hear of people getting visions of Jesus when they're going through an inner healing session, oftentimes what I see and what people have seen is not Jesus destroying their offender. I've never heard of a vision of someone saying that they're getting a vision of Jesus killing the person that they want to kill. You're probably envisioning that. But do you know what I see oftentimes? When I've talked to people, when I've walked through people in inner healing, often I see people, when they're going through this specific memory of trauma, pain, abuse, or abandonment, when they're going through that and they're rescanning the landscape of that moment, what people oftentimes see is they see Jesus in the corner weeping. They see Jesus in their darkest moment. And we all have that. We all have a story that we wish we never lived and a story that we're never going to tell. But Jesus knows that story. He knows that story. You have stories in your life where you're telling yourself, I'm going to go to the grave with this. And you can try. But Jesus, he knows that story. And if you were to sit in that moment for a minute, you would see that Jesus is there with you, not killing your offender, but weeping alongside you. Care for Jesus is not just him picking up a sword and destroying our enemies, but the care that Jesus exhibits is that he's sitting there with us, mourning with those who are mourning, weeping with those who are weeping. That Jesus' care, the embodiment of it, is not just him as a warrior, but him as a friend coming alongside us, weeping with us. Jesus did something about it. He took it to the cross. So have you felt his care? Last point. What did he do? What did he do? To have a relationship with God, it requires us to wrestle with the questions of his existence, his care. But we must wonder, Okay, so what did he do about it? Three things. And this is it, I promise. Three things. What did Jesus do? One, like I mentioned, he died on the cross. He took it to the cross and he gave his life so that you could have it. He suffered so that our suffering would have meaning and purpose in eternity. Second, he sent us the Holy Spirit. He sent us an advocate, a comforter. He sent us someone so that we would know we're not alone and that we're not doing this alone. He sent his Holy Spirit. And lastly, is the passage that we read. He loved us first. He loved us first. And this is an interesting passage because we have to ask ourselves, to what extent did he love you first? To what extent did he love you first? And you know, the only way you could even have a relationship with God is because he loved you first. The only reason why you're able to love things that are unlovable is because he loved us first. And I always say this, few people in this world will love you back. Like genuinely love you. There's even fewer who loved you first. But only God can love you before even the thought of you existed. The closest example of someone loving us first, I think, can be the example of a parent for a child, a parent's love for a child. But even the parental love that we have in this world has its limitations. Because oftentimes the parent's love starts with either in the waiting or in the womb. You may know of a couple, or you may actually be a couple that is waiting to see if you could finally get pregnant. That infertility is an issue, and it's a struggle that couples are genuinely going through. And you're waiting. You're waiting to see if you could have a child. And you love that child, even though it doesn't exist yet. Or you may be an adoptive parent waiting for a child to fill a room. Right? Mary shared her story about Skylar in the past baby dedication. Waiting 9 months for someone to call you and say, "We have a child for you." Or it could be a love that a parent has when they find out that there's a child in the womb. You know how my wife told me about our third child? Announced our third child to me. I was having this meeting with someone. And I made the mistake. I made the mistake of leaving my phone out on the table, which is why I never leave my phone out when I meet with people. And I made the mistake of leaving my phone out. And this person we were sitting at this coffee table, and she was weeping her eyes out, just bawling, and just sharing her story with me. And I got a notification. And on that notification, there was a picture. And on that picture was a pregnancy test that was positive. And so here's this girl crying her eyes out right in front of me. And I see this notification. And I'm like, you know what? I'm so sorry, Jamie, but can you give me a second? I walked out and I gave my wife a call. I was like, yes, we did it. And I had to go back and say, so tell me more about what's going on. Right? That oftentimes the parent's love starts either in the waiting or in the womb. But God's love is a little different. God's love, we think it's like a parent's love that starts in the womb or in the waiting. But it's not like that at all. You see, God's love for you, it didn't start in the womb. It didn't start in the waiting. Do you know where it started? It started with the Word. And you know what that word was? In the beginning. In the beginning. When he split the land and the sea to create this thing called earth. In the beginning, when he created animals and human beings to fill that land and that sea. In the beginning, when a bunch of angels met shepherds, and told them that the Messiah was born. In the beginning, when Jesus was hanging on the cross with nails in his hands and a nail in his feet, that's when his love for you began. And so for us, human society, every single person made in the image of God, We are all looking for this kind of love. The kind of love that's only found in the beginning. The kind of love that didn't just begin when your parents were waiting for you or when you were in the womb, but it started with the Word of God in the beginning. That's why if we can't find any human love or worldly love that can satisfy that desire for that cosmic, eternal love, the kind of love that was only there in the beginning, then maybe, just maybe, we were made for that kind of love. I believe that every single human soul is longing, desiring for that type of love, the love that could only be found in the beginning. That's when God conceived of you. Not when your parents put you together, but God, in the beginning, loved you first. That's the extent of how first God loved us. It didn't just start in the waiting. It didn't start in the womb. It started with the Word in the beginning. And the way He sees you, the way He loves you, the way He cares for you, He thought about you in the beginning. So how do you know? So how do you have a relationship with God? The way you have a relationship with God is that you just find the love that your soul has been longing for since the beginning of time. You find the love that was there in the beginning, before the waiting, before the womb. We find that love, and that love is in Jesus, and it was on the cross. Worship team, can you guys come up? We're just going to close this moment off here, and we're going to close really quickly. But and if we can take a moment right now and take stock of what's just happening in your heart. You know, we covered a lot. I intentionally covered a lot here and covered everything from suffering and pain to the philosophical questions of God's existence and His presence here on earth. And if we find that there's no earthly love that can satisfy us, if we find that there's no earthly love that can fulfill us, if we find that there's no earthly love that can give us the thing that we're longing for, maybe we were made for a love that is beyond this earth's time and space. But maybe we were made for a love that was in the beginning. Maybe we were made for that kind of a love. And we get so caught up on sometimes warming up our relationship with Jesus, our relationship with God, assuming that we have a relationship with God, but not asking the necessary questions about His existence, His care, and what He's done. And what He's done is that He's loved you first. And He loved you in the way that even when this earth was dark and amorphous, when this earth had no land, had no creatures, He thought of you and He saw you. That His love for you did not begin in the waiting or in the womb, but His love for you began with His word in the beginning. You're looking for that kind of a love. And so if you find yourself not being satisfied with the loves of this world, let me tell you something. It's because you want the love of Jesus, and it's yours. It's yours today. So won't you just rise with me? We'll close with this one song of worship. And I implore you, and I ask you to consider your relationship with God. Not just to make a decision to follow Jesus today, but to take stock of the longings of your heart and the love that you so desire, and realize that that love was only in the beginning. And who was there? God, His Holy Spirit, and Jesus. Let's worship.